Well, we're back in the saddle again with consideration of the topics of self-care and conflict. We have about 8 questions to cover, so let's kind of dive right in. The first question, Dr. Swain asked us to think a little bit about the stresses and strains that are typical to ministry. Does anybody want to pick one up?
Well, this is actually something that another class has prompted me to thinking about, and something I think sort of particular but not restricted to women is the work-home balance. I find that a particular stress. I'm not even in ministry yet, but I'm in, seminary. So, like the consequences of the second shift, the juggling, like the serious amount of juggling, the recognition that I actually wouldn't be able to be doing this if my husband didn't work from home, right? Like if he had a conventional job, this just wouldn't even be an option. I mean, it might be now that my oldest is 14, but when I started 4 years ago, he was not, he was 10. So,
Yeah, and Kornfeld has some interesting things to say about women in ministry and how dangerous the ministry is for women in particular. I think, I think in some ways we've come miles, but in some ways misogyny is still there, and it's just kind of set up to mitigate against women, I think, in every field, not just ministry.
Right. There's a sense, wait, where was I reading? Oh, I was reading something about it today. Maybe it was on Facebook or something like that. But yeah, it was a meme on Facebook, this sense that, women who work are supposed to treat their jobs as if they don't have a family, and they're supposed to administer their family as if they don't have jobs. And, the stress of holding both of those things, it is enormous sometimes. And it's not like, and it's not like my husband and I don't talk about it and do our best to balance it, but there's just a lot of, in the many ways that we talk about sort of unconscious systemic racism and stuff like that, there's a lot of really pre-conscious assumptions, that go into male and female roles, which make it like, now that it's not an illusion of freedom. It's certainly not an illusion. There's real freedom for women, but that doesn't mean that now all of that unconscious stuff doesn't exist. And it's a completely different process to be dredging it up and dealing with it, as opposed to be dealing with overt things. And so it's interesting and difficult, and that's a stress for me. So
yeah, that's a good one. I think the one thing that I've been dealing with, I'm preaching this week, which I just kind of learned on Tuesday, which is kind of an interesting stress in and of itself. But the scripture is the road to Emmaus. And there's this one section in there where they talk about they had an expectation where Jesus was going to be the Messiah, and he was going to change everything, and now he's dead, right? And so I think about expectations, and I've been pondering about the whole picture of what an expectation would be. And I think the whole idea of not fitting the expectation of the congregation that you're in, being called to some place where there's a bad fit, and perhaps there's always a bad fit, but we expected so much of you, but you're not fulfilling it or whatever. So
yeah, that's good. I'm making notes, Michael.
I'm preaching this weekend as well, and I connected with something later in the lecture, but that's good. And to the point about misogyny in the church, there's a 20s and 30s Facebook group for clergy and seminarians, which I'm a part of for the ELCA. And one of the things that's come up lately is misogyny, and just those microaggressions, such as in groups where there's pastors who are both men and women, pastors will be referred to, or male pastors will get Pastor Mike, right, as Pastor Mike says, and then they'll get, and as Shada says, even though Shada is an ordained.
That just became a thing, right? Because of this New York Times article that was talking about sexism in congregations and talking about the Thomas Keller speech in Princeton. right? And Carol Howard Merritt's
That's right.
critique of that. And then in the very article itself kept referring to Thomas Keller as, wait, is that his name? No, it's not Thomas Keller, is it?
Something like that.
Well, it's somebody Keller. I feel like Thomas Keller is a chef. Well, anyway, no, but they kept referring to him as Reverend and Doctor, but to the female pastors by, as you say, just their names.
Wow.
Yeah, right? It's just so insidious.
Right. So that's, as a male, that's something for me to be aware of and to help to challenge, right? I don't have to, it's not as stressful for me, but I hope to take that on as much as I can recognize it. But for me, yeah, the stress out, I mean, I echo what Shada said. The home life balance for me has been the most challenging part of this. And, I've told you both, but I took a vacation this past weekend and it put me behind. It was important for our family. It was important for my self-care. It was important for, it was the first time my wife and I had taken a trip without the kids in 5 years.
Wow.
We took a trip to Detroit for the youth gathering, but that was taking other people's kids. So that's not really a vacation either. So, but because of that, now I'm behind. So that juggling that, I completely hear that. That's one thing this is my second semester. So coming in, I didn't think that was going to be, I didn't think I spent as much time with my family as I did, I guess. So, yeah, balancing that has definitely been the most challenging part, because when big assignments come up, there's also, grocery shopping and picking the kids up daily, which breaks up my day in a way that I prefer to just kind of study through dinner or study through lunch. But I have, you have to break it up into chunks, and it's challenging. So, yeah, I echo that, and that's part of what's been stressing me out for sure.
Good deal. The next question asks us to attend to our own self-care, but also to think about the theological basis for it.
Mm.
I mean, obviously you get the whole Sabbath thing, Sabbath day concept that's important. Were there other things that occurred to people?
The thing that really jumps out to me is, and I've been noting this, is how often Jesus will run off by himself. He'll go and do some miracles, and then it says he'll be off by himself. And then he comes back out to the boat and he talks to people, and then he goes off by himself. And especially, of course, at the end, he goes off to pray, which is the thing we I think of most often when we think of Jesus taking time to pray. But I feel like that's Jesus himself gives a model of self-care in that he's doing ministry, but he takes breaks. I mean, he needs that spiritual regeneration, and it's a good example for me because it's something that that's something that as Dr. Swain said, falls to the bottom, right? Praying and going to church by yourself. I know that one of the things in the past that's helped me is just to go into an empty church. It's not my congregation, but just to go in there if it's open during the day and sit for a while. So those are the kind of things that I'm reminded Jesus actually gives us an example to do.
Yeah, that's nice. I do think about the Sabbath, like recently, not just in terms of rest, but how it prompts me to recognize that I am not God, right? That somehow this sense of trying to exempt myself from Sabbath even is putting myself above God in a way, like that if there was this God built rest into the creative process, but somehow I want to exempt myself from that, and there are ways in which it can go both ways. There are ways in which I feel like I don't deserve it, like maybe I haven't created enough, or on the other side of things is that it doesn't apply to me, and that comes out of like a self-arrogance that I can control everything. And so I find Sabbath to be a helpful reminder, like not to fall into the trap of either of those things.
One of the crazy connections that I've been making a lot lately is based on a comment that Dr. Robinson put on one of my journal postings. I was talking about Hosea and the question of why God keeps loving us. And he said something about, or why God does these crazy things, sort of thing. And he said something about, well, that's what happens when you're in love. You do some really unexplainable, crazy things. And it just gave me this little keyhole into this whole understanding, or not an understanding, but God's mystery of why in the world he loves us so much. And he's in love with us. And regardless of what we do, he keeps calling us back and whatever. So even in that, I think that there's a little message about self-care, is that you are worthy. You are worthy because God continually loves you. And no matter what you get done on a specific day, it's fine, because you have this crazy God who loves you and, keeps calling you back and back and back, no matter how. I don't know. Does that make any sense? Or am I just like blathering? So I've been trying to struggle a lot with like why God continues to forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive. And I mean, I get it. It's grace and stuff like that. But why? Why in the world? We screw up all the time. So I don't know.
Yeah. That reminds me, for another class last semester, I think it was Barbara Brown Taylor had a sermon on Sabbath, specifically addressing seminarians and pastors that we listened to, which was really, it was really nice. So if you have a chance, look that up.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
I'll see if I can find it from last semester. I can send it to you.
Third question is, how do we each deal with stress based on the data from the assessment? So I found the assessment kind of curious and kind of interesting, and made me stop and think about things. And most of those little crazy tests don't usually. So it spoke to me a little bit. Do you want to, I don't know, she said don't compare scores, but I mean, I don't know how else you talk about these things if you don't compare scores. So, and comparing to the average, I think maybe we could take each of the three and talk about that. I mean, the data is, in terms of satisfaction of care, I'm like 10 points above the average. I ended up with like 47 points there. I'm pretty happy with the way the last 30 days and what I've been doing at the cathedral has been going. I wasn't really surprised by that because I've been feeling like I've been in a pretty good place.
That's great.
Thoughts?
Mine was low, and part of that is, I think, just feeling stressed about the semester and the way I approach the questions, but also not having a lot of helping interactions in my congregation, like some, but the ones that I've had have mostly been with people with dementia, so which are hard for me to feel satisfied with, right? I know that it's important and I'm doing a good thing and I'm sharing love as best I can with people who don't know who I am. It does leave me a little unsatisfied, I guess. Not to be selfish, but it's hard to feel I did a great job. We're all connecting with God.
Sure.
So I guess it was a combination of things, and just also sort of my personality is pretty low key, so I don't get too worked up about too many things. But I need to. It says to me that I need to look for those opportunities where I can, and to really enjoy it when things go well. So it was, like you said, Michael. It's a helpful tool, which I did. Like you, I was hesitant to.
Yeah.
But it's good.
My score was just a little bit higher than average. So I feel like that's fairly representative of where I am right now. That I enjoy. I would really like made it be, as she suggested, like my work as a seminarian, since I don't have anything, so I felt like, that the work is being productive and useful and changing me, I think. And so I think that's why it's, generally a positive number.
Yeah.
It's feeling like it's doing something.
Yeah. I'm always skeptical when I hear the word burnout too. I mean, I realize the phenomenon exists, but I think sometimes we we trivialize it and say, I'm tired at the end of the day. Oh, I'm burned out. Where I think that there's more to it than that. My burnout score was really pretty much lower than the average. I don't know. I don't know what that says exactly. I mean, I'm not in a stressful. I'm not dealing with people with dementia. I'm, for better or worse, dealing with people that are hungry, and by and large seem to be very, vaguely grateful for the food that they get from the food pantry. I mean, that's like a constant theme on Monday mornings that I look forward to. And there's some pain in the ass people, and people that act all picky like they're at the Whole Foods or something like that, as they go through the line, but I don't know. I don't feel burned out at this point. I don't want to run away.
That's I just to reflect on that. That's so rewarding to have people come and take food, right? That's so direct. And I really kind of appreciate those people who are picky, because it just reminds me that we all have, whatever situation is, like, you want to get what you want to get. Like,
there's a good way to reframe it.
Yeah,
I like it.
Enjoy those people, because it's like, you know what? I'd probably do the same thing.
Right. We're still people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My burnout number was a little high. And I think it makes a difference that, like, we're taking it like now in the last week before graduating. I mean, in the last month before graduating. I think I might have got a slightly lower number if I taken it a month ago, but I'm definitely feeling like the effects of always being at a high level of stimulation, right? That every moment has to be leveraged to be something, except for, the moments where I'm exhausted and I have to rest, so like it gets to that point where I just know that level is unsustainable. And so thankfully it's not always the last month every month. So.
Right.
Yeah, mine was a little above average too, but in the average range. And I think it was just another good reminder, like, I need some better self-care habits, which I already know, but in juggling home, seminary and internship, it's hard to prioritize those things. So just need to get organized, which is always my downfall.
Hey, God's in love with you regardless. It's all good.
I'm just worried if the professors are in love with me. That's
minor point. How about the compassion or the vicarious trauma sort of thing, or this fatigue thing at the end? I was really puzzled by that, and I thought a lot about the concept, and I don't know that I came up with a lot of it. My score was average on it, but when I look back, there was one question that really like threw me and threw the score into average range, and that was about, I am unduly sensitive. I think it was like number 29. It was near the end, and it was like I said never, or almost never, or whatever, and I got 5 points for that. And I was going, really? I think sensitive is, in my mind, sensitive says I'm too touchy, or I mean, like our example that we were talking about from class last night, I didn't react in rage or whatever. I don't know. Was that question weird to you guys, or do you have more sense?
I wasn't quite sure how to interpret the word unduly, right?
Yeah.
Like, I just wasn't sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And being sensitive, I don't know, is like, it can have positive connotations, but it can have negative connotations too. So I was really, that one, I kind of threw out my results on that one, because I don't think that I'm particularly sucking up other people's chaos or tension. Do you guys have some thoughts on that?
I had an average number too, but it wasn't necessarily a benefit, but there was a time where I felt much more like, when I was working as a chaplain, and I felt much more affected by compassion fatigue, and I remembered what that felt like in comparison to now. So I could, like, there's a way in which I sort of answered the questions twice, where I was like, well, that would have been my answer then, and this is my answer now. And so that was sort of going on in my head at the same time.
Yeah, my number was pretty low, but yeah. So I don't think I haven't had those opportunities as often to. I haven't had a lot of trauma in my personal life or in my professional life. So yeah, I think I'm okay in that one.
I think I'm going to save these results till I get into CPE this summer and take it again. Take it again in the beginning of August, right?
Yeah, you and I can compare notes after that.
Okay, Adam, it's a deal. How about the 10 signs of seminary fatigue? Can we have some fun with that? Are there?
I know for myself, I'm getting, like, things are getting bad when I feel like I can't catch my breath. When I'm just like doing regular stuff and I'm just like, like that for me is just a sign of my increasing stress and emotional eating.
I think making judgments about the value of what I'm doing from moment to moment is really kind of frightening. I mean, last night I was sitting, in class, and I don't mind admitting this, I was sitting there reading stuff about the road to Emmaus instead of listening basically.
I was sitting next to Michael. I'm like, Michael's doing something else.
It felt so useless. And then I started getting into and I'm paying $1,600 a semester for this sort of thing. And then I kind of try not to go there. So judging what I'm doing at every particular moment, I think, is a sign of seminary fatigue.
Right. Well, but I think that's such a great point. Like, not having faith in the emergence of something we didn't expect, right? Because when something is like a list that you have to like get through, then suddenly there's no space for the newness and the emergence, which I think which has been one of the things I value most about, my seminary education, right? Like I never would have chosen to read this article or that book or,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But then suddenly when your head is full of everything that's due, you can't sit in that space and just have enough openness to see what comes out, there's no space.
Oh my God, that's going in my sermon for sure. Not having the faith that something will emerge. All
right.
Can you tell I'm obsessed? Adam, how about seminary fatigue for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's always bound up with procrastination. So I think it was in the Hammond book, he talked about, are these things you do? And one of them was playing mindless games. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh crap. Because that's where I go, right? I got a tablet last Christmas and I put Angry Birds on it for my kid, and I find myself playing that, right? So it's avoiding the stuff I know I have to do when it piles up. So because I was talking with Kristen about this for the case study, right? When I write essays and things, I like to have an idea of where I'm going, and then I'll start so that I have a direction to go, rather than what you're supposed to do, which is write and then edit as you go, or edit later or whatever. But with this case study, it's like, I don't know where it's going to go. So it's been hard for me to really push through on that. So I got an extension shot. I told Michael. But so yeah, it's avoidance for me. It's, I could probably watch another TV show. It's not that long. So it's all those, it's bargaining and doing all that stuff is when I know that I'm starting to get stressed out.
Well, and this case study is a great example of it, because Sunday I blew off everything after church, and I had a party I had to go to after church, and I just blew the day. And I knew I was doing it, and I kind of did it kind of willfully or whatever. And again, not knowing where things will emerge, like Shada said, and it was good. It was actually ended up being good for me. Yeah.
Well, it might have been some self-care that you needed, right?
Yeah, but I didn't call it that, but yeah, it was. And it's just, like watching YouTube videos is my mindless game. All right. Underlying feeling of compassion fatigue. I thought that the point that they made about isolation and withdrawing from the community is interesting in my case, because I live alone. And it kind of turns the narrative around a little bit. So I need to think through compassion fatigue a little bit more and what that means. You know I need me time. I get that. But what does it mean in my case? I don't know. I think I'm so weird in this compared to you two. So I'll let you guys talk about it first.
Wait, was this the question where she asked us to talk about compassion fatigue in regard to like the daily grind of ministry?
Right. And what's the underlying feeling? What does it feel like?
Got it.
Yeah.
You know, I keep thinking, Rob Bell had this great series of lectures from years and years ago on, I guess, just the mechanics and the experience of pastoral ministry, like when he was still in pastoral ministry. And he talks about death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? That life in ministry is like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Where it's just like this little thing, then this little thing, and then this little thing, you know, and that just builds up and builds up and builds up. And he was, I think at the time, if I recall, he talked about the only antidote he could find to that was radical forgiveness, right? So, because if you let them build up and the resentments build up, but if you practice radical forgiveness in every moment, that they don't then have the capacity to stay and grind you down, which I think is a good reminder. I think, at least in my experience of feeling compassion fatigue, I remember I was actually at this workshop on, so when I was a chaplain, I had this great colleague who introduced me to the idea of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, and because she had to be very vigilant because her background was counseling victims of domestic violence. So she like had to know what that was about and how to keep herself functioning. And there was a exercise where we wrote down like something like this, like symptoms we felt like maybe we were experiencing. And one of them I wrote down was generalized despair. And, you know, and we let other people read them, and someone else, like, this is not very pastoral of them. They read it and they're like, whoa. I was like, wait, you don't feel that too? What else are you doing here? And so, but like I did have this sense of heaviness, right? That it was just, but it wasn't related. It had generalized was the sense, right? That it wasn't any more related to a specific encounter anymore. Like it wasn't like I'm sad because of this person or this thing. It was like it infected me, you know.
Right.
And so that's how I remember experiencing it.
Yeah, I think I know what generalized despair sounds familiar. So you're not alone, Ashada, despite what someone's shock was.
Right, I know.
With you know, she talked. Dr. Swain talked in that question about like, you know, how building issues at church are sometimes the first thing that happen, or for me, like getting homework done. And this is when I wrote down balancing with family needs, right? All these things get you to this place of just being tired. And yeah, I think also sometimes it gets to that point of like, I think it's dangerous for me when I start thinking, well, no one's recognizing what I'm doing, right? Like thinking that no one is grateful for your work, even if that's probably not true. If it is true, you're in trouble, but it's probably not true. So thinking that all the stuff you're doing, like you said, Michael, all of this is just like, well, what's the point of this? What's the point of this meeting? Why are we repainting the church? We've got a volunteer who's leaving. Why are you upset? Like you take on all this angst in changes, or even in just the daily, like now I have another meeting. So yeah, I guess it's like you said, Shad, it's that tiredness and not wanting to, yeah, I don't know. And for some reason, this is where I wrote down how it connected to the walk to Emmaus. Something clicked with me.
No good.
Just to interject, but
neat ideas.
But yeah, the disciples are walking from trauma. They're literally discussing the trauma of the death of their leader, And in that walk, they recognize that Christ is walking with them. And I don't know if I was connecting that to compassion fatigue in any way, but I guess it's true that our daily grinds can make it feel like, what's the whole point here? Which is what part of what the question was about, is keeping the point of our ministry in the forefront, and recognizing that Christ is still walking with us. He isn't still dead. He's not dead, and he's not in the grave anymore. So I guess that was my connection to the sermon. If you want to bounce off that,
I'll take it. Any
that's
idea?
where I'm gonna go.
Anything else on compassion fatigue? My normal thought would be it would be some time when I would withdraw from people, but I spend so much time withdrawn from people to begin with. I mean, not in a bad way, but that's just the nature of my life, that I don't know quite what it all means for me. But I guess I'm going to find out this summer, what it really means. So we'll see. Self-care action plans was the next topic. Red, orange, and green. We have our regular strain, and then we go to stress, and then we go to danger. What are some of the things that we could plan, either together or separately, for self-care?
One of the things that I thought of in that section of the lecture, which I highlighted as a question, but it wasn't one of her questions, I think, is how do you set up that system for collegiality?
Right.
So when it gets to, orange and red, to proactively have that system. Michael, you were talking before our lecture about, or our discussion about a spiritual director that you have. And I know that I've been a part of sort of lecture studies, right? Lectionary studies for the month, and those kind of things are really important. So how do we set up some of those structures in our green zone, right? So that we can take care of professionally what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And facing the end of seminary and even looking forward to completing CPE, in September, I lose a whole support structure that these last 2 years has been really valuable to me. So how do you intentionally create that group that's going to talk about the things that I want to talk about, and like you say, look for signs in me that I'm somehow straying off the path. The whole issue of supervision and who really is keeping an eye out for you as you're a practitioner. It was a mystery in public schools. Okay, there was no effective supervision in public schools. There was, principal who walked in every once in a while and said, "Hey, things look good, keep going," sort of deal. But how you create some sort of meaningful peer group or interaction with a supervisor, in the sense of not job supervision, but accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is really important, because even the most self-reflective people will sometimes, and sort of honest people will sometimes still not be able to see things that are right in front of their face, right? And so that other viewpoint, right, from somebody who can see, whether it's a collegial group or whether it's supervision, seems just so important for knowing, for getting an ear out for warning signs, right? And orange, red, and green, right? Like just somebody who can tell you stuff that you may not be noticing.
Yeah. I know, Adam, you have something, but Kornfeld makes a really quick point about single men in ministry, and talks about that they don't have the buffer of families, which I had never thought about before, that sometimes your family can give you that feedback, but as a single man, you're kind of like inward focus can get away from you without even realizing it, which was really helpful for me to think about. I'm sorry, Adam, you
No, that's perfect. That's a great point, because certainly my wife will push me on that if I withdraw too much and try to pull me out in ways that I don't want to be pulled out sometimes, but and try to reflect really well. But yeah. You're talking about supervision. That I'm worried about that too. That's why I'm focused on the collegial groups, because I don't know how it is in your congregate or in your denominations, but in the LCA, there's there's little supervision for a pastor who's pastoring a church by themselves, other than the church council, but most of them tend to defer to the pastor in one way or another. So that's why I think it's so important to find, and in this area, I have a lot of friends who are pastors already, so it hasn't been difficult, but to keep up those relationships and wherever you go, to find people you can have a group with and talk with.
I hate to go all Book of Daniel on you, but I think it's such a strange relationship between Daniel and Beatrice, because I don't see that happening a lot. I see Bishop as being this remote CEO. I mean, I like her and all, but I don't see her interacting with my priest or with the bishops. The deacons or the other priests in the diocese that I know in quite that regular sort of life involvement that we see between Daniel and Beatrice.
So that doesn't really reflect the reality as you know it.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in the ELCA, it's different per every synod. The bishop, I know the smaller synods, the bishop's able to kind of see almost everyone every year, but in the big synods, that's just not the case at all in most synods. So, and
even then, the visit is so sort of perfunctory. I mean, I think in terms of the way that I understand it, anyway. So, okay, so our self-care action planning is all about finding a collegial group and maintaining some kind of accountability.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and another thing that's important that I've found is that I just have to notice physically, like, am I getting sick a lot? Like, that's definitely an orange plan, like an orange space for me. Okay, then do I need to like tweak my diet? Do I need to avoid sugar? Do I need to that's something that's important for me to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's also like, am I kicking the cat? Am I yelling at my kids? Sometimes it comes out as anger more than I like to admit it does. So, how do I direct that energy into exercise or into somewhere else?
Right, because what I like, and see, this is still a little perplexing for me, or at least. It's not resolved in that, at least my experience of last semester, for example, is that I was so busy and so stressed, but I was fine while I was doing it, right? Like I was organized and I'm on top of it and I'm like super mom, blah, blah, blah. I get to January and I am out for the count. Like I'm sick for like 6 weeks and there was like a death in our community. So I ended up sort of like, I think, imbibing some trauma around that, but just like, just really noticing that I couldn't tell I was in the orange zone, or at least I intellectually knew that I had to be, why wouldn't I be? But, and I was doing self-care, right? But I still ended up in the red zone more than I wanted to. And so I haven't resolved that yet. Like, okay, I just can't think how I could have done it differently and still succeeded in all the realms that I'm supposed to succeed in.
Right. I think that's really, really important. It's in the moment. Are you okay? Are you functioning okay? And yes, there are people that break down and Gibraltar crumbles and all that kind of stuff, but it's that afterwards. I had planned a vacation back in April for December and January, and oh my God, I was so glad I had, because I was in a different whole different environment, and it was so good for me. I don't know that I could have come back in February as positive and as bouncy if I hadn't had that time really away from everything.
So the sense of like not using your higher self in a way to plan for a future in which you know that yourself in the moment may not recognize, like the sense of like, gonna feel okay while you're doing it and the adrenaline's up, but like having the foresight to be able to plan for the crash or plan to prevent it. And
to not be upset about that crash. I mean, to say, okay, this is going to be the way it's going to be, and I'm going to be a slug for the first week, right. I'm done or something. Yeah, good. Anything else on that? We'll move to the last two, which I think are a little bit more amorphous in terms of how they're going to play out. But just the whole idea of church conflicts and where leaders and pastors are in all of that. So if we look at this as kind of like a group in conflict and what a leader's role is and how we can get sucked into it or not sucked into it. And I guess the question is, do we have any ones that would be positive, that would have positive outcomes so that you could say you came out of this conflict in a better place?
Well, I almost have an example of where it didn't work. Okay, like, have you guys ever heard of the process? It's called appreciative inquiry.
Yes, big fan.
Yeah, I was not directly involved with it, but the Bernathen community was for a time.
Oh my gosh, you worked. Yeah, I didn't know you worked with them.
Yeah,
that's your group.
The Bernathen community.
Yeah.
Oh, I live here. Yeah, that's where I live.
There was a guy who came and did appreciative inquiry for us in Central Pennsylvania, and that was the one big case study that he used. I wonder if it was the same dude.
Huh, interesting. Okay. Well, see,
anyway, Adam, before we get too far, appreciative inquiry is you're asking positive questions and you are not making conclusions. It's kind of like a different way of looking at strategic planning, where strategic planning is all about, here are the problems and we got to fix them. It's like, what are the gifts and what are the things that we can appreciate, and can we keep our minds open long enough to kind of look for it? It would have changed my life if I'd have run into that 20 years ago, because I did a lot of strategic planning workshops with people, and I did a lot of strategic planning with schools and with districts. And man, I'm sorry, I'm a big fan. I have to figure out who that guy was and find out if it's really.
And and I think it's sort of a cousin to, like, it feels to me like an ideological cousin to, like, the solution-based therapy.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what is already working? What are the gifts that are already here? So with that said, like, I feel like, again, I wasn't really involved with it a lot, but I got the gist of where it was going, and I do think it's a really great program. However, it didn't actually lead anywhere in our community. Like, they got the action groups going, and then nothing, and then the groups kind of didn't do anything. And and the only one that did was one that was trying to run a survey on whether women should be ordained in this branch of the Swedenborgian Church. And they finished their project, and they presented the information to the community, but none of the other projects. And I just keep wondering why. Like, I wonder if, like, she talks about, like, just whether it was too positive in a way, right? Like, were things actually really openly acknowledged and courageously embraced, as she talked about? Like, what, or like, why? I don't know. Or maybe folks are just lazy. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the deal is. But so I bring it up because it seems like it was like the perfect example of, because it came out of like a time that was conflicted, right? It came out of a time where people were at each other because we weren't sure about the priorities of the community. Like, people were going ahead with certain things, and they're like, this is not, so it came out of a desire to not be in conflict anymore, and to not be engaging with each other in non-helpful ways around the conflict, right? But I wonder, did it circumvent it in a way that wasn't, right? Like, would it be more helpful to learn the nonviolent communication techniques, or, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I quite know enough about it, about the situation, or about appreciative inquiry enough to be able to make a really incisive analysis of it. But, or does it, as you're saying, like, does it reflect, like, because it was a lay initiative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the pastors did get on board, but I wonder again, like, talking about the church conflict is a reflection of the leader. Was there not enough leader buy-in? Even though it was supposed to be about lay empowerment, right? And so, was there something off about the balance? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Listen, I've spent years on this whole idea of organizational development and schools and all that kind of stuff. And schools are the most conservative, I think, institutions that we have, they don't change rapidly or easily. The culture is so, fixed almost, that you can blow it apart with all kinds of things. But like you said, there's so many things that can go wrong if the leader hasn't bought into it, or even if the leader has bought into it and then the people haven't bought into it, or, there's like, oh my gosh. That's why I have a hard time thinking of conflicts that have ended well. Seriously. And I don't mean that,
like so many things have to go right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one little thing can screw up the entire process. And now I'll stop blathering. But
Adam, rescue us from this.
Yeah, please.
Pessimism.
I have nothing but pessimism to add. My church is in my placement site is in the middle of repainting and putting down new floors, and in the middle of that, we're reclaiming a space at the back of the sanctuary that used to be like a chapel, but it has those pulley walls, those not pulley, those stretchy walls that pull out from the wall, and it was a space where we are doing this ministry. The church has been doing ministry for a lot of years, handing out baby clothes to people who need it. So they collect clothing and hand out clothes. Well, it just doesn't look welcoming. So if we're trying to redo the church, we had to move it anyway to put down a new floor and paint. So we put it in the basement. Well, you move someone's chair and that's it. So the volunteer who's taken ownership of that has had a really hard time with it. And we put it in the basement and she wanted to expand the space. We said, well, we have this nursery school down here and they need this space for the weekend. We need to move it back. And so now she's done. So this is, I guess I'm in the middle of an example of how communication, I think my coordinating pastor has done an okay job of nonviolent communication, or at least, direct communication, but it's everyone else, right, that are involved where one message doesn't get communicated clearly and then it becomes something else. No, I don't have anything good to add. This is all I could think about in terms of communication because we're in the middle of it and it's so present. So I'm waiting, and I've tried to be the student this first year, especially to not take ownership of these big changes. I'm certainly there and a part of it, but I want to see how this plays out, and maybe it can be a case study for next year.
Sounds good. And how about if we end the session with the discussion of that this eighth question about individuals, and when have you engaged in nonviolent communication and when has it come out well? When have we done this best? Can you think of examples that are worth sharing?
For me, it's when my wife and I finally figured out how to talk to each other. We're very different, and in terms of the Myers-Briggs, if you've ever taken that, we're polar opposites. In terms of the Enneagram, if you've taken that, we're opposites. It says we shouldn't get along. When we had been in places where we've used reflective listening and things, but it takes a long time before you actually apply that to your own life, right? So once we started to be honest and figured out how to talk to each other, and we didn't have the nonviolent communication structure, but it's all that I feel, and here's where I'm coming from, not trying to solve the problem, which is usually where I try to go right away, right? It's, well, let's just do this. But being able to be heard from both sides, that's when we do that well, that's, we see results from it. So I guess that was personally, I've seen us grow in that way. It took us, 6-7 years to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That was an answer that I was going to give too in my marriage, that is an example of where I've learned, how to do that effectively and well, and coming to an understanding that I think there's so many times where good communication is, it's put forth as a skill set, which it is, but it's also like a mindset and a state of being, right? Like that it doesn't work if you're not willing to come, like you can't just only come to a conversation willing to listen. You need to come to a conversation willing to let what you've heard change you. And like I've had so many situations, like again, I spoke about my own context, you know, like the struggle for women's ordination. There have been many, many times where there have been there's been respectful listening, you know, of people's stories and of exclusion and you know, and my own, right? It's my story. And there's been respectful listening, empathic listening, and the answer is still no. You know, it's like, okay, you know, like, there you go, like, you know, and it's not like that kind of communication means that people will agree necessarily. I mean, in parenting, you can listen empathically and care and still say no. You have to make boundaries, but you can tell when it's just surface, and when you come to it with the spirit of feeling like change is possible. And I think that's possibly why it so often fails in churches, because people don't want to change. Change is scary. So, yeah.
I've had an interesting personal thing that's happened over the last 6 months, and I don't want to go into a huge detail, but I finally met a man that I really, really thought that I could spend the rest of my life with. And that's amazing and should be celebrated. But he's in a relationship with somebody who he has lived with for 13 years without having any love, or without having any, I don't think, any kind, from my observations anyway, any kind of real connection with. So I've been going through this very, very strange time of trying to do this observation and trying to do this communication, but also with a person who has been kind of, in my world, I mean, the way I look at it, sort of abused by this relationship. And he's allowed himself to be abused. I understand all of that sort of thing. But at one point, maybe about a month and a half ago, I tried some of my pastor tricks, you know. I tried some of this like nonviolent communication strategies and listening strategies to try to get to a deeper level with this person. And he absolutely just shut down and froze, because again, I think like Shada, you were talking about, he doesn't want to change. I mean, you know, the devil you do know is better than the devil you don't know, I guess. And it ended up, he just decided that he was not, I sent him a poem that, you know, reflected something about, or song lyrics or something, reflected something about a relationship. And then I got no response. And for like almost a month and a half, he didn't communicate with me at all. And that's fine. You know, I get it. We had a social engagement that we had already made, and I went to that, and he came up and he apologized, and he said, I really need to not be shutting you out. We need to explore this sort of thing. And I'm going, John, it's okay. You know, wherever you are, that's fine, and we'll live with that. And I need to change, like you said, change who I am, sort of, and the way that I'm looking at this, and not try to be violent to him and his situation. I mean, I don't know. It's a very, very, it's fraught. I think it's the only way he could say it. So,
Yeah.
So nonviolent communication that has a good end, I think, because I think I'm in a little bit better place to know sort of where he is and who he is. And it's not like he's ever been like, he hasn't lied to me or anything like that. He's always said, this current situation is fine, and he wants to protect it. Who knows? So,
yeah, I'll keep you in my thoughts, Michael. That's tough. That's tough.
Kind of, it is what it is. You know, it's really funny to meet somebody that you think you could potentially have a future with, and somebody who's obviously looking for connection and relationship, and then to have sort of this wall or garage door descend.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the way you said it, Shada, though, that's really helpful. Coming to the situation, willing to let what you hear change you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. That's what it was in my marriage, right? Because you can only change yourself, right? That's the other thing that you learn in long-term relationships, is that you see couples where they try to change the other person, and you just think it's never going to happen. It's just you can't do it. You can only change yourself.
And regardless of what I want out of this relationship, I have to be open to hear and allow it to change me, you know, what we've said to each other. So interesting. Okay, do we do it? We got through 8 questions.
All right.
I'll hit the stop button and then we can